The blood on Zelda Warner's hands had long since dried, but she still scrubbed them raw in the basin behind the general store where she worked, her knuckles white and cracked from the cold November water. It was 1882, and Hillsborough, New Mexico had welcomed her 3 months ago with nothing but suspicious stares and whispered questions she refused to answer. The weight of what she carried pressed against her ribs like a stone, making it hard to breathe some mornings, making it impossible to sleep most nights. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. The bell above the store's front door chimed, and Zelda dried her hands quickly on her apron, wincing at the sting. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, had gone to Santa Fe for supplies, leaving her to manage the shop alone for the week. She appreciated the solitude, the way it let her hide behind work and numbers, and the simple task of stacking canned goods on shelves. When she stepped back into the main room, she found a man standing by the counter, dust covering his boots and the lower half of his denim trousers. His hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "Help you with something?" Zelda kept her voice flat, professional. She had learned not to encourage conversation. The man turned, and something in his expression caught her off guard. It was not the usual assessment she received from men, that calculating look that tried to determine if she was available, marriageable, or loose. Instead, he looked tired in a way that mirrored her own exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep and could not be cured by a good night's rest. "Need some tobacco and rolling papers," he said. His voice was rough, like he had not used it much lately. "And coffee if you have any that is decent." Zelda moved behind the counter, grateful for the barrier it provided. "We have beans from California. Mr. Henderson swears by them. I will take 2 pounds. He pulled coins from his pocket, setting them on the scarred wooden surface. His hands were calloused, the nails clean but ragged. Working hands, honest hands. Zelda tried not to notice. She measured out the coffee beans, wrapped them in brown paper, and tied the package with twine. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She had gotten good at not wasting time, at not giving people opportunities to ask questions. But when she handed him the tobacco and papers, their fingers brushed, and she pulled back as if burned. "Sorry," she muttered. "No harm done." He collected his purchases, but did not immediately leave. "You are new to Hillsborough." It was not a question, but Zelda answered anyway. 3 months now. I am Frank Dalton. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Small operation, just me and my horses mostly. Zelda nodded but did not offer her own name. She had learned that names led to conversations, conversations led to questions, and questions led to places she could not go without breaking apart completely. Frank Dalton seemed to understand. He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt genuine rather than perfunctory, and headed for the door. But he paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at her. "If you ever need anything, miss, my place is the one with the white fence. You cannot miss it coming from town." Then he was gone, and Zelda was alone with the silence and the weight pressing against her chest. She did not know why his simple kindness made her want to cry, but she swallowed it down the way she swallowed everything else and went back to scrubbing her already clean hands. That night, in the small room she rented above the seamstress shop, Zelda lay awake and watched shadows move across the ceiling. The wind outside rattled the windows, carrying the scent of mesquite and dust. She thought about Kansas, about the farmhouse where she had grown up, about her younger sister's laugh and the way the wheat fields looked at sunset. She thought about things she had no right to think about anymore, things that belonged to a version of herself who had died 18 months ago on a cold February morning. The nightmares came as they always did, pulling her under before she could fight them off. She woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the November chill. The room was still dark, hours yet before dawn. Zelda pulled her knees to her chest and rocked slowly, trying to remember how to breathe, trying to convince herself she was here, now, in New Mexico, and not back in that farmhouse with the smoke and the screaming. Work was her salvation. She arrived at the general store before sunrise, let herself in with the key Mr. Henderson had entrusted to her, and lost herself in inventory and bookkeeping. Numbers did not ask questions. Numbers did not judge. She was pricing a new shipment of fabric when the door opened and Frank Dalton walked in again. "Morning," he said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone, as if he knew his presence was an intrusion. "Morning." Zelda set down her pencil. "What can I get for you today?" "I need some lamp oil and matches, and maybe some of that coffee again, if you do not mind. It was better than decent." While Zelda gathered his order, Frank wandered the store, his hands clasped behind his back like a man in a museum. He stopped in front of a display of books, his head tilted as he read the spines. "You read much?" he asked. Zelda wrapped the oil tin in paper. "When I can." "What do you like?" The question was so normal, so ordinary, that it disarmed her. "I like adventure stories," she heard herself say. "Stories about people going places far from here." Frank nodded slowly. "Escape." Something like that. He selected a slim volume from the shelf, something by Washington Irving, and added it to his purchases. As Zelda tallied his bill, he said quietly, "I came here 4 years ago from Texas, after the war, after some other things. I needed to be somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could just work and not think too much." Zelda's hands stilled on the register. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw the same shadows she carried reflected in his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because you look like you might understand, and because sometimes it helps to know you are not the only person carrying something heavy." The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment she could not speak, could not breathe. The weight in her chest expanded until she thought it might crack her ribs. Frank Dalton just stood there, patient and solid, not pushing, not demanding anything from her. "I should finish your order," she managed finally. "Of course." He paid, collected his things, and headed for the door. This time he did not pause, did not look back, just left her standing there with her carefully constructed walls trembling. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Zelda served customers, restocked shelves, swept the floor, but her mind kept returning to Frank's words, to the gentle understanding in his voice. Nobody in Hillsborough had treated her with anything but suspicion or pity. The women whispered about her behind their hands. The men either avoided her or looked at her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. But Frank Dalton had looked at her like she was human, like her pain was real and valid, and not something shameful to hide. That evening, as she locked up the store, she found a package on the step. It was the book Frank had been looking at, Washington Irving's stories, wrapped carefully in brown paper with a note tucked inside. The note read, "In case you need to escape tonight." No obligation to return it. It was unsigned, but she knew the handwriting somehow, strong and slightly uneven, like the man himself. Zelda carried the book upstairs to her room and sat by the window as the sun set over the distant mountains. She opened to the first story and began to read, and for the first time in 18 months, the weight in her chest eased just enough to let her breathe. The next time Frank came to the store was 6 days later. Zelda had read the book twice through, savoring every word, every moment of escape it provided. She had the volume waiting on the counter, wrapped and ready to return. "Thank you," she said as soon as he entered. "I appreciate the loan." Frank smiled, and it transformed his whole face, chasing away some of the weariness. "Keep it. I already read it 3 times. It should belong to someone who needs it more." "I cannot just take it." "Why not? Consider it payment for always having my coffee ready when I need it." Zelda shook her head but found herself smiling despite herself. "That is literally my job." "Then consider it a gift from one reader to another." He leaned against the counter, easy and unhurried. "What did you think of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow?" They talked about books for 20 minutes, about stories and characters and the way words could transport you somewhere better. Zelda felt rusty at conversation, clumsy with anything that was not transactional, but Frank was patient, never pressing when she stumbled, always giving her space to find her words. It should have been terrifying, this gradual chipping away at her defenses, but instead, it felt like relief. I should get back to work, she said finally, reluctantly, and I should stop bothering you. Frank straightened, then hesitated. Miss Warner, I was wondering if you might consider coming out to my ranch sometime. I have a mare who just foaled, and the colt is about the friendliest thing you have ever seen. Thought you might like to meet him. Zelda's first instinct was to refuse, to shut down this overture before it could become something more. But she looked at Frank's open, honest face and heard herself say, When? Sunday afternoon? I could come fetch you around one if that suits. I can ride out myself. I remember you said the white fence. Frank nodded, understanding her need for independence, for the ability to leave on her own terms. Sunday at 1 then. After he left, Zelda stood in the empty store and wondered what she was doing. Getting close to people was dangerous. It led to questions, to revelations, to the inevitable moment when they would discover what she had done and look at her with horror instead of kindness. But the thought of that foal, of spending an afternoon somewhere other than this store or her tiny room, was too tempting to resist. Sunday arrived cold and clear. The New Mexico sky stretched endless and blue overhead. Zelda borrowed a horse from the livery, ignoring the stable hand's curious looks, and rode north out of Hillsboro. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all red rock and scrub brush and the distant purple smudge of mountains. She found Frank's ranch exactly where he had described it, a modest spread with a white fenced corral and a small house that looked well maintained. Frank emerged from the barn as she rode up, wiping his hands on his trousers. He wore a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hat pushed back on his head. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed on his own land. You found it. He came to help her dismount, offering his hand. Zelda took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the steadiness. It was not hard. She looked around the property, taking in the neat barn, the house with its covered porch, the vegetable garden now mostly bare for winter. This is nice, peaceful. That is why I chose it. After years of noise and chaos, I needed quiet. Frank led her toward the corral where a chestnut mare stood with a gangly foal at her side. That is Rosie and her boy. I have not named him yet. Thought I would wait and see what his personality turns out to be. The foal was all legs and curiosity, approaching the fence with his ears pricked forward. Zelda reached out slowly, and he sniffed her hand, then nibbled at her fingers, looking for treats. He is beautiful, she said softly. Would you like to come in and sit with them? Frank opened the gate and Zelda stepped into the corral. The foal danced around her, full of play, while Rosie watched with patient maternal eyes. Zelda laughed, actually laughed, as the colt nuzzled against her, and the sound startled her. She could not remember the last time she had made that sound. Frank leaned against the fence, watching with a slight smile. He likes you. He likes everyone, I bet. True enough, but you are good with him. Calm. Horses notice that kind of thing. They spent the afternoon with the horses, Frank explaining his plans for the ranch, his hopes to breed quality stock. He talked about his life in bits and pieces, never asking for anything in return. Zelda learned he was 28, that he had served in the war when he was barely more than a boy, that he had lost his family to cholera years back. He spoke about loss with a matter-of-factness that suggested he had made peace with it, or at least learned to carry it without letting it destroy him. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Frank invited her inside for coffee. The house was small but comfortable, everything in its place, no clutter or chaos. Zelda sat at the simple wooden table while Frank worked the stove, his movements efficient and practiced. You take care of yourself well, she observed. Had to learn. No one else around to do it for me. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and sat across from her. Can I ask you something, Miss Warner? Zelda tensed. You can ask. I might not answer. That is fair. Frank wrapped his hands around his cup, steam rising between them. You ever think about what comes next? After you have run far enough? The question struck something deep inside her. I do not know if there is an after. Sometimes running is all there is. I used to think that too. Spent 2 years just moving, never staying anywhere longer than a season. Thought if I kept moving, what I was carrying would not be able to catch up. He met her eyes across the table. But it always did. Every town, every job, there it was waiting for me. So what changed? I got tired, I guess. Tired enough to stop and face it, to let myself feel it instead of always running. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I am not saying it is easy or that the pain goes away, but it becomes something you can live with instead of something that is killing you slowly. Zelda's throat tightened. What if what you did is unforgivable? Whose forgiveness matters most, other people's or your own? She had no answer to that. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Frank did not push, did not pry. He just sat with her in the quiet, solid and present, and somehow that was more than she had had in longer than she could remember. When Zelda finally rode back to Hillsborough, as twilight settled over the desert, her chest felt lighter. Not unburdened, but less constricted, as if someone had loosened the ropes binding her ribs. She did not let herself think too hard about what it meant, this lightness. She just held on to it as long as she could. Frank started coming by the store more regularly after that, always with some excuse, some item he needed. Zelda pretended not to notice the pattern, pretended she was not disappointed on the days when he did not show up. They developed a rhythm, an easy back and forth that felt natural. He would tell her about the ranch, about the horses, about the hawk that nested in his barn. She would tell him about the customers, about the books she was reading, about the sunrises she watched from her window. Slowly, carefully, they built something between them. Not quite friendship, not yet something more, but a connection that felt vital, necessary. Frank never pushed for more than Zelda was willing to give. He seemed to understand instinctively where her boundaries were, which topics were safe and which would send her retreating back behind her walls. December arrived with cold winds and occasional snow flurries. Mr. Henderson returned from Santa Fe with new inventory and praise for how well Zelda had managed the store in his absence. She smiled and accepted his thanks, but her mind was elsewhere, circling around Frank and the strange, terrifying possibility that she might be feeling something she had no right to feel. On a particularly cold afternoon, Frank arrived at the store just as Zelda was closing up. I was hoping to catch you, he said, stamping snow from his boots. I am heading into town tomorrow for supplies. Thought maybe you would like to come out to the ranch for supper tonight instead of eating alone in your room. Zelda knew she should refuse. Supper was more intimate than coffee, more deliberate. But the thought of another evening alone with her ghosts was unbearable. All right. They rode out together in Frank's wagon, the horses' breath steaming in the cold air. The ranch looked even more welcoming with lamplight glowing in the windows. Inside, Frank had a fire going in the stove, and the whole house smelled like wood smoke and coffee. I am not much of a cook, he warned as he pulled out ingredients, but I can manage stew that will not poison you. I can help. Zelda shrugged off her coat and rolled up her sleeves. They worked side by side in the small kitchen, chopping vegetables, browning meat, moving around each other with surprising ease. It felt domestic, comfortable, and that scared Zelda more than anything. Over supper, Frank told her about a wild stallion he had been tracking in the hills, a magnificent paint horse that kept evading his attempts to get close. I swear that horse is smarter than most people I know, he said with a laugh, but I will gentle him eventually. Just takes patience. Zelda found herself talking too, the words coming easier than they ever had. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about her father's farm, about her little sister Sarah, who had been all sunshine and mischief. She did not tell him about the fire, about the ending, but she gave him pieces of her past, that she had not shared with anyone since arriving in New Mexico. When she finally glanced out the window, full darkness had fallen. I should get back. Stay. Frank said it quickly, then added, I mean, it is dark and cold, and I have a spare room. You can head back first light. I promise I am a gentleman. Zelda knew she should refuse, but she was tired of always refusing, always holding back, always being afraid. All right. The spare room was small but clean, with a real bed and warm blankets. Zelda lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling, to Frank moving around in the other room. For the first time in 18 months, she felt safe. Not just physically safe, but safe in a deeper way, as if the walls she had built around herself could finally come down without everything collapsing. She must have eventually slept because she woke to pale morning light and the smell of coffee. Frank was already up, working in the barn. Zelda found him checking on Rosie and her foal, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the colt play. Thank you, Zelda said finally. For supper. For the room. For all of it. Frank turned to look at her, something searching in his expression. Zelda, I know you are carrying something heavy. I do not need to know what it is unless you want to tell me. But I want you to know that whatever it is, it does not change how I see you. Her breath caught. It was the first time he had used her given name. How do you see me? As someone brave and strong, and doing her best to survive something terrible. As someone worthy of kindness and second chances. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand. As someone I would very much like to know better, if you will let me. Zelda looked down at their joined hands. She should pull away. She should tell him everything so he would understand why she could not do this, could not let herself feel anything for anyone. But the words would not come. Instead, she tightened her grip and held on like he was the only thing keeping her from drowning. They stood like that until the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Then they went inside for breakfast, and Frank told her more stories about his horses, and Zelda laughed at his terrible jokes, and for a few hours, the weight she carried felt almost manageable. Winter deepened, and so did whatever was growing between Zelda and Frank. She rode out to his ranch every Sunday, and he came by the store at least twice during the week. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of trust and understanding that neither of them had expected to find. But Zelda's past was always there, lurking at the edges of every happy moment. The nightmares still came, still dragged her back to that February morning. She would wake gasping, her hands reaching for people who were not there, her mind replaying choices she could not unmake. It was late January, when everything finally came to a head. Zelda was closing up the store when Sheriff Morrison walked in, his expression grim. Her heart seized in her chest. This was it. They had found her. They knew. Miss Warner, I hate to bother you, but I need to ask you some questions. Zelda forced herself to breathe. What about? There was a fire up in Kansas about 18 months back. A family named Warner died. Father, mother, young daughter. Authorities have been trying to track down the oldest daughter, Zelda, to notify her. He pulled out a folded paper. Thought maybe you might be her, given the name and all. The world tilted. Zelda grabbed the counter to steady herself. Notify me of what? They are dead. I know they are dead. So you are her. Morrison's voice was gentle, not accusing. Miss Warner, there is no warrant out for you. No charges. The fire was ruled an accident. A lantern knocked over, investigators said. But folks have been worried about you, wondering where you went. Zelda shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It was not an accident. It was my fault. I was upset I was not paying attention. I knocked the lantern over when I was arguing with my father. I killed them. I killed my whole family. The words she had been holding inside for 18 months came pouring out. She told Morrison everything. about the argument, about her father forbidding her to marry the boy she loved, about her grabbing the lantern in anger and it falling, the oil spilling, the flames spreading so fast she could barely get out herself. About the screams, about trying to go back in, but the fire was too hot, too fast. About her mother's final cries, her sister's terrified voice, about being too afraid to face the consequences, so she ran. When she finished, she was on the floor, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Morrison knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Miss Warner, listen to me. The investigators talked to witnesses, to the fire brigade, to everyone. The house was old, the wood dry. That fire spread fast because the structure was a tinderbox, not because of anything you did or did not do. And even if you did knock over that lantern, it was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident, but not murder, not a crime. But I ran. You were in shock, traumatized. Hell, I cannot imagine what you went through. He helped her to her feet. You are not wanted for anything. You are free to stay here or go back to Kansas or go anywhere you want, but you need to stop punishing yourself for something that was not your fault. After Morrison left, Zelda sat in the empty store as night fell around her. She did not light the lamps, just sat in the darkness and let herself feel everything she had been holding back. The grief, the guilt, the crushing weight of believing she was a murderer who deserved nothing good or kind or loving. She did not know how long she sat there before the door opened and Frank stepped inside. He must have seen Morrison leave, must have known something was wrong. He crossed the room without a word, pulled Zelda into his arms, and held her while she fell apart completely. I killed them, she sobbed into his chest. My family. I killed them all. Tell me, Frank said quietly. So she did. She told him everything, every terrible detail, every moment of that night that had replayed in her mind 10,000 times. Frank just held her and listened, his arms solid and sure around her, anchoring her to the present when her mind tried to drag her back to the past. When she finally ran out of words, Frank said, Zelda, look at me. She raised her head, meeting his eyes in the darkness. What happened to your family was a tragedy, a horrible, painful tragedy. But it was an accident. You did not murder anyone. You did not commit a crime. You were a young woman in an impossible situation, and something went terribly wrong. But I should have been more careful. I should have saved them. I should have done something. You survived. That is what you did. You survived and you kept going even when the guilt was crushing you. That took strength most people do not have. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. You have been carrying this alone for so long. Let me help you carry it. You do not have to do this by yourself anymore. Something broke open inside Zelda, some last desperate defense that had been holding her together through sheer stubbornness. She clung to Frank and cried for her mother, her father, her baby sister Sarah, who would never grow up. She cried for the girl she had been before the fire, for the innocence and naivety she had lost. She cried for the 18 months she had spent punishing herself, believing she deserved nothing but loneliness and pain. Frank held her through all of it, steady and patient, never flinching, never pulling away. When her tears finally subsided, he said, "Come home with me tonight. Do not be alone right now." Zelda nodded, too exhausted to argue. They rode out to the ranch in the wagon, and Frank got her settled in his spare room with hot tea and extra blankets. But when he turned to leave, she caught his hand. "Stay, please. I do not want to be alone." Frank hesitated only a moment, then pulled a chair over beside the bed and sat down, still holding her hand. "I will be right here, I promise." Zelda fell asleep like that, Frank's hand wrapped around hers, his presence a bulwark against the nightmares. And for the first time in 18 months, she slept through until morning. The next few weeks were difficult. Zelda had to confront everything she had been running from, had to let herself grieve properly instead of just drowning in guilt. Frank was there for all of it, patient and understanding, never pushing but always present when she needed him. She wrote letters to relatives back in Kansas, reconnecting with an aunt and uncle she had not spoken to since the fire. They wrote back with love and forgiveness, urging her to forgive herself. Her aunt told her that her mother's last words, according to witnesses, had been prayers for Zelda's safety. That knowledge hurt and healed in equal measure. Slowly, painfully, Zelda began to understand what Morrison and Frank had been trying to tell her. She had not murdered her family. She had been involved in a terrible accident, yes, but she was not a killer. She was a survivor dealing with trauma and grief, and she deserved compassion, not condemnation. As winter gave way to early spring, Zelda felt the weight in her chest gradually lessening. Not disappearing, she knew the grief and guilt would always be part of her, but becoming something she could carry without it crushing her. Frank helped with that, teaching her by example how to live with loss, how to honor the dead by living fully instead of just surviving. They spent more time together, their relationship shifting from friendship into something deeper. Frank was careful, respectful, always making sure Zelda was comfortable with each new step. Their first kiss happened on a March afternoon, standing in his corral with the foal playing nearby. It was gentle and sweet, and Zelda felt it all the way to her toes. "I love you," Frank said afterward, the words simple and honest. "I have loved you since that first day you looked at me like you understood exactly what it felt like to carry something too heavy." Zelda's breath caught. "I love you too. I did not think I had the right to love anyone anymore, but I do. I love you so much." They married in April, a simple ceremony with just a few friends present. Zelda wore a blue dress she had sewn herself, and Frank looked handsome in his best suit. As they said their vows, Zelda felt her family's presence, not as a weight of guilt, but as a blessing. She imagined her mother smiling, her father nodding his approval, little Sarah dancing with joy. The wedding night was gentle and tender. Frank showing Zelda with his body what he had been showing her with his actions for months, that she was worthy of love, of pleasure, of happiness. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed they would now share, and Zelda felt at peace for the first time since the fire. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Frank's hand traced lazy patterns on her back. "For helping me put some of this down. The pain, the guilt. For showing me I did not have to carry it all alone." Frank pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "We carry it together now. All of it. The good and the bad, the joy and the grief. That is what marriage is, I think. Sharing the weight so neither of us gets crushed by it." Zelda smiled against his chest. "I like that." Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zelda still worked at the general store 3 days a week, but the rest of her time was spent helping Frank with the horses. She discovered she had a talent for it, a natural way with the animals that Frank said was rare and valuable. Together, they began building the ranch into something more successful, breeding quality horses that ranchers from across New Mexico came to buy. The wild paint stallion Frank had been tracking finally let himself be caught that summer. Frank gentled him over weeks of patient work, and when the horse was ready, he gave him to Zelda. "He is yours," Frank said, watching as Zelda stroked the stallion's neck. "I figure you two understand each other. Both wild things that needed someone to be patient and kind." Zelda named the horse Phoenix, and he became her constant companion on rides through the desert. There was something freeing about galloping across the red earth, the wind in her hair, the powerful animal beneath her responding to her slightest touch. She felt alive in those moments, truly alive, not just going through the motions of survival. In October, Zelda realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She told Frank one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he let out a whoop of delight that scared the barn cats. "We are having a baby?" He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed. "Zelda, that is the best news, the absolute best." But that night, after Frank fell asleep, Zelda lay awake wrestling with fear. What if she was a terrible mother? What if something happened to the baby because of her carelessness? What if she lost this child the way she had lost Sarah? She must have made some sound because Frank stirred beside her. What is wrong? I am scared, Zelda admitted. What if I cannot do this? What if I hurt the baby somehow? Frank rolled to face her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. You are going to be an amazing mother. I know you are scared, and that is okay. It means you care, but you are not that frightened girl in Kansas anymore. You have grown so much, become so strong. And I will be right here with you every step of the way. Promise? I promise. We are in this together, remember? Sharing the weight. The pregnancy was healthy but not easy. Zelda dealt with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons and exhaustion that made the simplest tasks feel monumental. But Frank was true to his word, taking over her chores without complaint, bringing her tea and dry toast in bed, rubbing her feet when they swelled. The baby came on a warm May afternoon in 1884, 2 years after Zelda had first arrived in Hillsboro. The labor was long and hard, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Zelda's arms, all the pain vanished in an instant of pure wonder. It is a boy, the midwife announced. A healthy, strong boy. Frank was crying, tears running down his face as he looked at his son. He is perfect, absolutely perfect. They named him Samuel Frank Dalton, Samuel after Zelda's father. Holding him, feeling his tiny weight in her arms, Zelda understood finally and completely that she had not been cursed or condemned to a life of penance. She had survived a tragedy and found a way to build something beautiful from the ashes. I wish my family could meet him, she said softly, tracing Samuel's tiny features with her finger. They know him, Frank said, his arm around her shoulders. Somehow, wherever they are, they know him, and they are happy for you, for us. Zelda let herself believe that. She let herself believe her mother was watching with pride, her father was nodding approval, Sarah was cooing over her nephew. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed into something gentler, something that coexisted with joy instead of crushing it. Samuel was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh. Zelda threw herself into motherhood with a fierceness that surprised her. Every milestone, the first time he rolled over, the first tooth, the first word felt like a miracle. Frank was a devoted father, spending hours with Samuel, teaching him about horses and the land, even when he was far too young to understand. The ranch continued to thrive. By the time Samuel turned 2, they had expanded their operation, hiring 2 hands to help with the work. Zelda managed the business side of things, her head for numbers making her invaluable. They were building something lasting, something that would outlive them and pass to their children. On a September evening in 1886, Zelda stood on the porch watching Samuel play in the yard with the barn cats. He was 2.5 now, all energy and curiosity, with Frank's dark hair and Zelda's blue eyes. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. Frank came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? Everything. How far we have come. How different my life is now from what I thought it would be. She leaned back against him. I never thought I would be happy again after the fire. I never thought I deserved to be happy. And now? Now I understand that happiness is not something you earn or deserve. It is something you choose every day, even when it is hard, even when the grief and guilt are still there. She turned in his arms to face him. You taught me that. You helped me see that I could put down some of what I was carrying and still honor the people I lost. Frank kissed her, slow and deep. You did the hard work yourself. I just walked beside you. You did more than that. You saved me, Frank. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, he corrected. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live again, to build something instead of just maintaining. They stood together in the fading light, watching their son play, and Zelda felt a contentment so profound It brought tears to her eyes. She had survived the worst thing she could imagine. She had carried grief and guilt that should have destroyed her, and she had come out the other side with a man who loved her unconditionally and a life richer than she had dared to dream. The nightmares still came sometimes. Zelda would wake, gasping, reaching for people who were not there, and Frank would hold her until the fear passed. But they came less frequently now, and when they did not have the power to break her the way they once had. In the spring of 1887, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear, more excitement. Samuel would have a sibling, someone to grow up with and play with. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in December, on a cold, clear night, Zelda gave birth to a daughter. "She looks like you," Frank said, cradling the tiny girl. "Same nose, same mouth." They named her Sarah after the sister Zelda had lost. It felt right, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future. Holding baby Sarah, with Samuel asleep in the next room and Frank beside her, Zelda felt the last piece of something broken inside her click back into place. "I can breathe," she said wonderingly. "Frank, I can finally breathe without it hurting." He kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "Good. That is good." The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch grew into one of the most successful in the territory. Samuel grew into a bright, inquisitive boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. Sarah was quieter, more contemplative, with a talent for drawing that delighted everyone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frank surprised Zelda by taking her back to Hillsboro, to the general store where they had first met. Mr. Henderson had retired, but the new owner let them inside after hours. "This is where it started," Frank said, standing by the counter where Zelda had first measured out his coffee. "This is where I first saw you and knew somehow that you were important." "I did not know that then." Zelda ran her hand over the scarred wood. "I thought you were just another customer, another person who would eventually see through me and realize what I was. What you were was a woman in pain, carrying more than anyone should have to carry alone." Frank pulled her close. "And what you are now is the strongest, bravest, most loving person I know, the best wife, the best mother, the best partner. I am so grateful you walked into my life. Zelda Dalton." She kissed him there in the empty store, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. "I am grateful for you every single day, for your patience, your kindness, your refusal to let me keep running. You helped me see that I could stop, could face what I had done, and still deserve a life." "We all deserve second chances," Frank said. "We all deserve to be loved despite our mistakes and our scars." They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, their horses moving in easy synchronization. At home, they paid the neighbor girl who had been watching the children and tucked Samuel and Sarah into their beds. Then they sat on the porch, Frank's arm around Zelda's shoulders, and watched the night settle over their land. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked quietly. "Taking on someone with as much baggage as I had?" "Never, not once." Frank's voice was firm, certain. "You were not baggage, Zelda. You were a gift. You are a gift." In 1892, their third child was born, another boy they named Jacob. By then, Samuel was 10 and Sarah was 5, both excited to have a baby brother. The house that had once seemed too big for just Frank now rang with the noise and chaos of a full family. Zelda threw herself into motherhood and the ranch with equal passion. She taught Sarah to read and Samuel to manage the ranch books. She gentled horses and balanced ledgers and made a home that was warm and welcoming. And at night she fell into bed beside Frank, exhausted but fulfilled, the weight that had once threatened to crush her now just a distant memory. On a summer evening in 1895, when Samuel was 13, Sarah was 8, and Jacob was 3, the whole family gathered on the porch after supper. The children were playing a game, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Frank had his arm around Zelda, and they watched their children with the quiet contentment of parents who knew exactly how lucky they were. Mama, Sarah called, tell us a story about when you were young. Zelda tensed automatically, but Frank's hand on her shoulder steadied her. She took a deep breath and said, All right, I will tell you about your grandparents and your Aunt Sarah, who you are named after. It was the first time she had talked about them openly with the children. She told them about the farm in Kansas, about her father's strong hands and her mother's beautiful singing voice, about little Sarah, who had loved wildflowers and fireflies and had the sweetest laugh. She told them about the fire, too, about the terrible accident that had taken them away. Were you very sad? Young Sarah asked, her eyes wide. I was devastated. I thought I would never be happy again. Zelda looked at Frank, drawing strength from his steady gaze. But then I came here and I met your father, and he taught me that it was okay to be sad and happy at the same time, that I could honor the people I lost by living a good life, not by punishing myself forever. I wish I could have met them, Samuel said thoughtfully. Me too. They would have loved you all so much. Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not the painful tears of before. They were softer, gentler, the tears of someone who had healed enough to remember with love instead of just pain. But even though they are not here, they are part of you. You have Grandpa Samuel's stubbornness. Sarah has Grandma's artistic eye, and Jacob has Aunt Sarah's joy. They live on through you. That night, after the children were in bed, Frank and Zelda lay together in the darkness of their room. That was brave, Frank said softly, telling them. It felt good, like another piece of the weight lifting. Zelda rolled to face him. I spent so long hiding from my past, terrified that anyone who knew the truth would see me as a monster. But you never did. You saw me, really saw me, and you loved me anyway. I loved you because of who you are, scars and all. Those scars are part of your story, Zelda. They do not define you, but they are part of what makes you so strong. We have a good life, do not we? The best life. Frank kissed her softly. Better than I ever dreamed possible. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father and as sharp with numbers as his mother. At 18, he began courting a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and Zelda watched with bittersweet pride as her little boy became a man. Sarah at 11 was all creativity and compassion, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the desert, the horses, her family. She had Zelda's blue eyes and thoughtful nature, and already people were saying she would be a beauty. Jacob at 6 was pure mischief and energy, keeping everyone on their toes. He had a gift for making people laugh, for finding joy in the smallest things. On Zelda's 40th birthday in 1898, Frank threw her a party that brought half the county to their ranch. As Zelda looked around at the crowd neighbors who had become friends, the children running and playing, the life they had built together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Happy birthday, my love," Frank said, pulling her into a dance as someone started playing fiddle music. "How does it feel to be 40? Honestly, amazing. 20 years ago, I did not think I would live to see 30, let alone 40. I was so lost, so broken." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her by refusing to let her stay lost. "You gave me my life back, Frank. You gave yourself your life back. I just held your hand while you did the hard work." They danced under the stars, surrounded by family and friends, and Zelda thought about that terrified, grief-stricken young woman who had arrived in Hillsboro 16 years ago. That woman had been carrying so much pain, so much guilt, so much self-hatred. She had been drowning in it, crushed by it, unable to see any way forward. But Frank had seen her, had recognized her pain because he carried his own. He had not tried to fix her or save her or take away her grief. He had just walked beside her, helped her carry what was too heavy for one person alone, and slowly, patiently, taught her that she could put some of it down and still be honoring those she had lost. In 1900, Samuel married his sweetheart Catherine in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Watching her son exchange vows, Zelda cried happy tears. Frank squeezed her hand, understanding without words what she was feeling: pride, joy, and the bittersweet knowledge that her baby was grown and starting his own life. Samuel and Catherine built a house on the edge of the Dalton property, and in 1901, Zelda became a grandmother when they welcomed a daughter named Emma. Holding her first grandchild, Zelda felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. "Look at you," Frank said, watching as Zelda cooed over baby Emma. "You are a grandmother." "We are grandparents," Zelda corrected with a laugh. "Lord Frank, when did we get old enough for that?" "Speak for yourself. I am still young and spry." They were both graying now, Frank's dark hair shot through with silver, Zelda's blonde going lighter. But they were healthy and strong, still working the ranch side by side, still very much in love. In 1903, Sarah at 16 fell in love with a young schoolteacher who had moved to Hillsboro. Zelda watched her daughter bloom under the attention, saw her own young self in Sarah's hopeful eyes. But this time, there would be no tragedy, no fire, no loss. Sarah and her teacher courted properly for 2 years before marrying in a spring ceremony that was somehow even more beautiful than Samuel's. Jacob at 14 was already talking about seeing the world beyond New Mexico. He wanted to study veterinary medicine, to work with animals in new and scientific ways. Zelda and Frank supported his dreams, even as they knew it would take him far from home. The ranch continued to prosper. They had established themselves as the premier horse breeders in the territory, and their reputation spread far beyond New Mexico. Cowboys from Texas, ranchers from Colorado, even wealthy men from back east came to buy Dalton horses. But more than the success, more than the money or the reputation, what mattered was the family they had built, the life they had created from the ashes of their respective pasts. Zelda thought often about the young woman she had been, about the pain that had nearly destroyed her. She thought about Frank's gentle patience, his steady presence, his absolute refusal to let her keep punishing herself. On a spring evening in 1905, Zelda and Frank celebrated their 21st anniversary. The children, though all adults now, had thrown them a party, and the ranch was full of grandchildren and laughter. After everyone left, Zelda and Frank sat on their porch, the same spot where they had sat countless evenings before. 21 years, Zelda marveled. More than half my life now. The best half, Frank said. He looked older now, his face lined, his hair more silver than dark. But his eyes were still the same creek water green, still looked at her with the same love and understanding they had from the very beginning. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the store, about knowing what it felt like to carry something too heavy?" "I do. I meant it too. I saw you, Zelda, and I recognized that look because I had worn it myself for so long. You helped me put it down. Not all of it. I will always carry some of that grief and guilt. But you helped me see that I did not have to carry it alone, that I could share the weight and still honor the people I lost." Zelda took his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically after so many years. "I would not have survived without you, Frank. I would not have this life, these children, these grandchildren. I would have just kept running until I ran out of places to go." "But you did not run. You stopped. You faced what happened, and you forgave yourself." "That took more courage than anything I ever did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Zelda thought about her family in Kansas, about the people she had lost so many years ago. The pain of their loss had never fully gone away, but it had transformed into something she could live with, something that made her appreciate every moment of the life she had built. "I hope they know," she said softly. "My parents, my sister. I hope they know I am happy, that I built something beautiful, that I did not waste the life they gave me." "They know," Frank said with certainty. Somehow, Wherever they are, they know, and they are proud of you, just like I am proud of you every single day. In 1908, Jacob left for university in California, breaking Zelda's heart even as she smiled and waved goodbye. But he came home for holidays and summers, full of stories about his studies and his adventures. He was growing into a fine young man, compassionate and intelligent, determined to make a difference in the world. Zelda and Frank grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They were the couple everyone in Hillsborough pointed to as an example of what marriage should be: partnership, respect, unwavering devotion. What people did not always see was the work behind that devotion, the way they had helped each other heal from old wounds, the way they had chosen each other every day, even when it was hard. On a warm summer evening in 1910, 26 years after their first meeting, Zelda and Frank sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 60s now, both moving a bit slower, but still active and engaged in the ranch and their family. 3 grandchildren played in the yard: Emma, now 9, Samuel's son Thomas, 7, and Sarah's daughter Ruth, 4. "Can you believe this is our life?" Zelda asked, gesturing at the scene before them. "All of this, from that chance meeting in Henderson's store." "It was not chance," Frank said. "It was fate. You needed someone who understood what it meant to carry pain, and I needed someone who would remind me why life was worth living. We were supposed to find each other, Zelda. I believe that with everything in me." "I believe it too." She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses, and the sage that grew wild on their land. "Thank you, Frank Dalton. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I did not love myself. Thank you for helping me carry what was too heavy to bear alone." "Thank you for letting me," Frank replied. "Thank you for trusting me with your pain, with your story, with your heart. You made me whole again. Zelda, you gave my life meaning and purpose beyond just existing." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, and somewhere in the barn, horses nickered softly. It was an ordinary moment, nothing special or dramatic, just another evening on the ranch. But to Zelda, it was everything. It was the life she had never thought she would have, the happiness she had believed was forever out of reach. It was the proof that even the heaviest pain could be survived, that even the darkest guilt could be transformed into something lighter, something manageable. She had lost so much in that fire 28 years ago. Her family, her innocence, her belief that the world was safe and controllable. She had run from that loss for 18 months, carrying it alone until it nearly destroyed her. But then she had found Frank, or he had found her, and everything had changed. He had not taken away her pain. He hadn't fixed what was broken, but he had stood beside her while she did the hard work of healing. He had helped her carry what was too heavy for one person alone. He had loved her not despite her scars, but because those scars were part of who she was. And in loving her, in helping her put down some of that crushing weight, he had saved her life as surely as if he had pulled her from a burning building. As full darkness fell, and the grandchildren were called inside for bed, Zelda and Frank remained on the porch, content in each other's presence. They had built something lasting here, something that would outlive them. Their children would inherit the ranch, would pass it to their own children, and the Dalton name would continue on this land they had tended with such care. But more than the land, or the horses, or the property, what would endure was the love story they had written together. A story about pain and healing, about guilt and forgiveness, about 2 broken people who found each other and built something beautiful from their shared scars. "I love you," Zelda said into the darkness. "I love you too," Frank replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together under the stars, 2 souls who had found exactly what they needed in each other and knew without question that they were home.